The distant whistle of the approaching train cut through the afternoon air, but Nora Reynolds barely heard it over the pounding of her heart and the ceaseless arguments replaying in her mind. 7 months pregnant, she sat alone on the wooden platform of Wasco's train station, her swollen ankles aching and her future as uncertain as the dusty horizon that stretched out before her across the Kansas plains. The year was 1876, and the promise of a new life that had brought her west now seemed like a cruel joke played by fate itself. The station was nearly deserted in the midday heat of August. Most townspeople had the good sense to stay indoors until the worst of the sun's punishment had passed. A lone station attendant dozed inside the telegraph office, and a mangy dog panted in the sliver of shade beneath the platform. Nora's valise and carpetbag, all that remained of her possessions, sat beside her on the rough-hewn bench. She dabbed at her damp forehead with a handkerchief, trying to compose herself. The eastbound train would arrive in less than an hour. It would carry her back to St. Louis, back to her sister's begrudging charity, back to the whispers and judgments that had driven her west in the first place. But what choice did she have now? The sound of spurs jangling against wooden planks made her stiffen. She didn't turn around, hoping whoever approached would pass by without notice. No such luck. "Mind if I sit, madam?" The voice was deep, graveled by years of dust and tobacco, but not unkind. Nora glanced up at the tall figure now blocking the harsh sunlight. Xavier Blackburn, the cattle rancher, whose property bordered the northern edge of town. She'd seen him occasionally at Sunday services, or when he brought his men to town after a cattle drive, but they'd never exchanged more than polite nods. "It's a public bench, Mr. Blackburn," she replied, shifting slightly to make room. Not that it was necessary, the bench had space for 3, and she was mindful not to take up more than her fair share. He settled beside her, not too close, respectful of her space. His hat, a worn, wide-brimmed Stetson, was pulled low, but she could see the weathered lines around his eyes, evidence of years squinting against the prairie sun. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way of the dandies back east, but there was something compelling about his face, a steadiness, a solidity that spoke of a man who knew exactly who he was. "Eastbound's not due for nearly an hour," he said, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the tracks disappeared. "I'm aware." Nora smoothed her dress over her rounded belly, a gesture that had become a habit in recent months. Xavier glanced at her luggage. "Heading back east?" The simple question nearly undid her. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them, and she turned her face away, mortified. "Yes," she managed after a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't speak immediately, and she was grateful for that. When he did, his words surprised her. "I won't leave." Nora turned to look at him, confusion furrowing her brow. "I beg your pardon. I won't leave you sitting here alone, Mrs. Reynolds. Not in your condition, not in this heat." His eyes, the color of a stormy Kansas sky, met hers directly. "And if you'd permit me to say so, I think leaving Wasco might be a mistake." Indignation flared within her. "You know nothing of my circumstances, Mr. Blackburn. I know Harrison Whitley left town 2 weeks ago after his father found out about the child." His bluntness startled her. "I know he promised to marry you and then ran like a yellow-bellied coward when facing up to his responsibilities got difficult." Nora felt the blood drain from her face. "How dare you? The whole town knows, Mrs. Reynolds. Small places have big ears." His tone softened. "I'm not judging you. If anyone deserves judgment, it's Whitley." She turned away again, humiliation burning in her chest. "Then you understand why I must leave. I can't stay where everyone knows my shame." "Shame?" Xavier shook his head. "The only shame I see is how this town has treated you since news got out. You've been teaching our children for 2 years, and suddenly folks act like you're carrying the plague instead of a child. It's different for a woman, she said bitterly. Especially a school teacher. It shouldn't be. They sat in silence for several minutes. The heat pressed down around them, and in the distance, a hawk circled lazily against the vast blue sky. "I have a proposition for you, Mrs. Reynolds," Xavier said finally, his voice careful, measured. She tensed. She'd heard propositions before, especially since her condition had become evident. Men thinking a woman in her situation would be desperate enough for any offer. She'd slapped Jasper Miller, the saloon owner, just last week for suggesting she could make good money entertaining his customers. Seeing her expression, Xavier quickly added, "Not that kind of proposition, madam. I'm suggesting a business arrangement." "What kind of business could I possibly have with you, Mr. Blackburn? My sister died last winter. Influenza." His face tightened with the memory. "She left behind twin boys, just turned 4. They're living with me at the ranch now, but they need proper schooling. A woman's influence." Nora stared at him, beginning to understand. "You're offering me employment as a governess." "As their teacher, yes. Room and board at the ranch plus wages. The boys need education and you need—" He gestured vaguely toward her midsection. "A place where you and your child can have a fresh start. Away from wagging tongues," she finished for him. "My ranch is 10 miles outside town, far enough." Nora looked down at her hands, considering his offer. It seemed too convenient, too fortunate. "Why would you do this, Mr. Blackburn? You hardly know me." His weathered face softened slightly. "I know you're a fine teacher. I've heard how you stood up to the school board when they wanted to expel the Martinez children for speaking Spanish. I know you stayed up 3 nights straight nursing the Wilson kids through scarlet fever when their mother fell ill too." He paused. "And I know what it's like to face this world alone when it seems determined to break you." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. There was no pity in his expression, only a straightforward offer of practical help. "What about after my child is born?" she asked cautiously. "The position is permanent if you want it. Your child would be welcome." He shifted on the bench, suddenly looking less sure of himself. "I know it's not ideal. Living on a ranch isn't easy, especially for a woman used to town life. But it's honest work and you'd have your own quarters in the main house. Complete respectability." The distant whistle sounded again, closer now. The eastbound train was approaching. Nora felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her, heavier than the child she carried. "I don't need your charity, Mr. Blackburn." "It's not charity I'm offering, Mrs. Reynolds. It's employment." His voice took on a note of gruff humor. "Trust me, trying to teach those 2 boys is earning your keep. They ran off the last tutor I hired after putting a rattlesnake in his boot." Despite herself, Nora felt a small smile tug at her lips. "They sound spirited. That's one word for it." He stood, towering above her, and extended his hand. "The train's coming, Mrs. Reynolds. What'll it be? East back to whatever you're running from, or north with me to start fresh?" Nora looked at his outstretched hand, then at her luggage, then down the tracks where a plume of smoke was now visible on the horizon. The child within her kicked, as if offering its own opinion on the matter. "I'll need my own room with a lock on the door," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "And I won't be treated as a servant." Xavier's face broke into a genuine smile, transforming his features completely. "Deal." He picked up her bags with one hand, still holding the other out to help her rise. "My wagon's hitched behind the station. We can be home before sundown." Nora hesitated just one moment longer before placing her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, but his grip was gentle as he helped her to her feet. As they walked away from the platform, The train whistle sounded once more behind them. She didn't look back. The journey to Xavier Blackburn's ranch passed mostly in silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable one. Nora found herself studying the landscape as they traveled north of Wasco rolling prairie, dotted with wildflowers that had somehow survived the August heat, occasionally broken by stands of cottonwood trees marking the path of creeks and small waterways. It was beautiful in its vastness, so different from the crowded streets of her childhood in Philadelphia, or the neat town grid of Wasco. Xavier handled the team of horses with the easy confidence of a man who'd spent most of his life in a saddle. Occasionally, he would point out landmarks: a lightning-struck oak that marked the halfway point to town, a rocky outcropping where mountain lions sometimes denned, the distant silhouette of the Flint Hills on the horizon. "That creek running alongside the trail feeds into the property," he explained as they crossed a small wooden bridge. "It's never run dry, even in the worst droughts. My father chose this land well." "You inherited the ranch?" Nora asked, grateful for the neutral topic of conversation. Xavier nodded. "Pa came out here in '52 before Kansas was even a territory, built up a decent spread, about 8,000 acres now, been adding to it when I can." "That's impressive," he shrugged. "Hard work mostly, good timing, right place when the railroad came through." As they crested a small rise, the ranch spread out before them. Nora couldn't help but gasp slightly. She'd expected something modest, perhaps like the smallholdings outside town where farmers struggled to coax crops from the sometimes unforgiving soil. But Blackburn Ranch was substantial, with a large two-story main house built of local limestone. Several outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse set a respectful distance from the main residence. A windmill turned lazily beside what appeared to be a substantial water tank. "It's much larger than I expected," she admitted. Xavier flicked the reins lightly. "Started small. The original cabin still standing behind the main house. Use it for storage now." There was a note of pride in his voice, but no boastfulness. As they approached, two small figures burst from the front door of the main house, followed by a harried-looking older woman. The boys, clearly the twins Xavier had mentioned, raced toward the wagon, shouting with excitement, "Uncle Xav! Uncle Xav!" They called in unison, practically bouncing with energy. Xavier brought the wagon to a halt and set the brake before turning to Nora. "Brace yourself," he said with unexpected humor in his eyes. "Hurricane twins incoming." Before she could respond, the boys had reached them, both trying to scramble up the wagon wheel at once. They were identical, dark-haired, freckle-faced, with the same storm-gray eyes as their uncle. "One at a time," Xavier said firmly, lifting first one boy and then the other into the wagon bed. They immediately peppered him with questions. "Did you bring candy? Who's the lady? Why is her belly so big? Can we ride your horse later, boys?" Xavier said, his deep voice cutting through their chatter. "This is Mrs. Reynolds. She's going to be your teacher. You will show her the same respect you'd show me. Understand?" The twins grew suddenly quiet, studying Nora with identical expressions of wariness and curiosity. "Mrs. Reynolds, these rapscallions are Jacob and Joseph. Usually called Jake and Joe, except when they are in trouble, which is more often than not." "It's a pleasure to meet you both," Nora said, summoning her schoolteacher voice. "I look forward to our lessons together." The boys exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. Nora had seen that look before, the silent communication between children planning mischief. Well, she'd handled plenty of troublemakers in her classroom. These two would be no different. The older woman who had been following the boys reached the wagon, slightly out of breath. "Land sakes, Mr. Blackburn, you might have sent word you were bringing company." She eyed Nora's condition with a mixture of surprise and disapproval. "Mrs. Hollister, this is Mrs. Reynolds," Xavier said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "She's our new teacher for the boys and will be staying with us indefinitely. Please prepare the east bedroom for her, the one with the morning light." Mrs. Hollister's pinched expression suggested she had plenty to say about this arrangement, but she merely nodded stiffly. "Supper's in an hour. I'll have Virgil bring in her things." With that, she turned and marched back toward the house. "Mrs. Hollister keeps house," Xavier explained as he helped Nora down from the wagon. "She's been with the family since I was a boy, set in her ways, but she means well." Nora wasn't so sure about that, but she nodded politely. "Joe, go help Virgil with the horses," Xavier instructed. The boys groaned but obeyed, racing off toward a stocky, middle-aged man who had emerged from one of the outbuildings. Leading Nora toward the house, Xavier added in a lower voice, "The boys share a room down the hall from where you'll be staying. My quarters are on the opposite wing. There's a small sitting room adjoining your bedroom that will serve well for lessons." The main house was impressive inside as well, not lavishly furnished, but solid and well built, with polished wooden floors, a grand staircase, and surprisingly large windows that let in the late afternoon light. It was clean and orderly, though distinctly masculine in its decor. Few personal touches softened the practical furnishings. "This was my parents' home," Xavier said, noticing her gaze. "Haven't changed much since they passed." "It's lovely," Nora said sincerely. After her tiny rented room above the milliner's shop in town, the spaciousness felt almost decadent. Xavier led her upstairs to what would be her quarters. The bedroom was large and airy, with a four-poster bed, dresser, washstand, and rocking chair positioned near the window. The adjoining sitting room was smaller but charming, with built-in bookshelves and a desk that would work well for teaching. "Will this suit?" Xavier asked, an unexpected note of uncertainty in his voice. Nora turned slowly, taking it all in. After months of fear and uncertainty, after the crushing disappointment of Harrison's abandonment and the town's judgment, this unexpected sanctuary seemed almost too good to be true. "It's perfect," she said softly, blinking back tears she hadn't expected. "Thank you, Mr. Blackburn." He cleared his throat, looking slightly uncomfortable with her emotion. "Xavier, if you're going to be living here, might as well use my given name. Then you must call me Nora." He nodded once, then gestured toward the door. "I'll leave you to settle in. Supper's at 6 sharp, Mrs. Hollister doesn't tolerate tardiness." After he left, Nora sank gratefully into the rocking chair, allowing herself a moment of relief. She placed her hands on her rounded belly, feeling the child move within her. "Well, little one," she whispered, "it seems our luck may have changed after all." She could never have imagined how true those words would prove to be. The following weeks brought an adjustment period for everyone at Blackburn Ranch. For Nora, it meant establishing a daily routine with the twins, who proved to be as challenging as Xavier had warned, but also surprisingly bright. For Xavier, it meant growing accustomed to having a pregnant woman in his bachelor household. And for Mrs. Hollister, it meant accepting, albeit grudgingly, that Nora was not a temporary visitor but a permanent addition to the household. The boys tested Nora immediately, as she had expected. On her first morning, she discovered her chalk had been replaced with cheese. On the second day, they released a toad in the schoolroom. By the third day, they had progressed to hiding her teaching materials throughout the house. Rather than growing frustrated, Nora incorporated their mischief into her lessons. When they hid her books, she created a geography lesson about maps and treasure hunting to find them. When they placed a garden snake in her desk drawer, she turned it into a natural science lesson, having them research and draw the creature before releasing it outdoors. "You're not mad?" Jake asked suspiciously after the snake incident, clearly disappointed by her calm reaction. "Should I be?" Nora asked, raising an eyebrow. "You've given me an excellent opportunity to teach you about reptiles, though next time perhaps we could bring nature indoors in a more controlled manner." The twins exchanged confused glances. Their previous tutor had quit in a rage after their pranks. This new approach left them off balance and increasingly intrigued by their unusual teacher. By the end of the second week, the boys were still rambunctious, but they had begun to channel their energy into their lessons. Nora discovered that Joe had a natural talent for mathematics, while Jake showed promise in writing and storytelling. Both were starved for attention and praise, which she gave freely when deserved. Xavier observed these changes with quiet approval. He had initially kept his distance, allowing Nora space to establish her authority with the twins. But as September progressed, he began to join them occasionally for afternoon lessons, listening from the doorway as Nora read aloud from The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, or helped the boys with their sums. One evening after the twins had been put to bed, Xavier found Nora in the small library, reviewing the next day's lessons. The lamplight cast a warm glow over her features, softening them. Her pregnancy had advanced noticeably in the weeks since her arrival, and she often rested one hand absently on her belly as she worked. "You've done wonders with them," he said, causing her to look up with a start. "Sorry, didn't mean to frighten you. Just lost in thought." She smiled, setting aside her notes. "And thank you, but they're good boys at heart. They just needed structure and consistency." Xavier entered the room fully, taking a seat in the leather armchair opposite her. Their mother would be pleased. "Catherine always worried they'd grow up wild as weeds under my care." "You've done well by them," Nora said gently. "They adore you. They need more than just a busy uncle." He rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "When Catherine and her husband died, I wasn't sure I could manage. Cattle, I understand. Children," he shook his head, "different sort of creatures entirely. Yet here you are doing your best for them. That matters more than you might think." Nora hesitated, then asked, "If you don't mind my asking, what happened to their father, trampled during a cattle drive last year?" "Catherine moved back here with the boys afterward. Then the influenza took her in February." His expression remained composed, but Nora could see the grief in his eyes. "Their grandparents, my parents, passed years ago. I'm the only family they have left." "I'm so sorry," Nora said softly. "They're fortunate to have you." Xavier's gaze shifted to the window, though nothing was visible in the darkness beyond. "What about your family? Will they help after the child comes?" Nora's hands tightened in her lap. "My parents disowned me when I left Philadelphia to teach out west. They considered it inappropriate for a woman of my background." A bitter smile crossed her lips. "Imagine their reaction to my current situation." "And the father?" Xavier asked, his voice carefully neutral. Harrison Whitley believed his family's banking interests were more important than his promises. Nora lifted her chin slightly. "When his father threatened to disinherit him if he married me, he chose his inheritance over his honor." Xavier's expression darkened. "Some men don't deserve the name." "It's for the best," Nora said, though the words still tasted false. "He would have made a terrible father." "And husband," Xavier added bluntly. Their eyes met across the room, and Nora felt an unexpected flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the child she carried. She looked away first, suddenly conscious of the impropriety of their situation alone together in the evening discussing such personal matters. Xavier seemed to realize it too. He stood, nodding toward her lesson plans. "I should let you finish your work. Good night, Nora." "Good night, Xavier." After he left, Nora remained in the library for a long time, her lessons forgotten as she considered the strange turn her life had taken. She had come to Wasco 2 years ago seeking independence, determined to make her own way as a teacher rather than submit to the marriage her parents had arranged with a man 30 years her senior. She had found that independence, only to lose her heart to Harrison Whitley's false promises. Now here she was, pregnant and unmarried, yet somehow in a better situation than she could have hoped for after Harrison's abandonment. The irony wasn't lost on her, nor was the growing awareness that her feelings toward her taciturn employer were becoming dangerously complicated. "This won't do," she whispered to herself, gathering her papers. "You're here to teach his nephews not to develop foolish attachments." But as she climbed the stairs to her room, she couldn't help but remember the gentleness in Xavier's eyes when he spoke of his family, or the quiet strength in his voice when he said, "I won't leave." October brought cooler weather and the first hints of autumn to the Kansas prairie. The tall grass began to turn golden, and mornings often dawned with a light frost that burned away by midday. On the ranch, preparations for winter were well underway, hay being stored, repairs made to outbuildings, cattle being moved to more sheltered pastures. For Nora, now in her 8th month, movement became more difficult. Her lessons with the twins shifted to accommodate her reduced mobility. More reading sessions in the comfortable library chairs, more writing exercises at the large table, fewer nature walks around the property. The boys, to her surprise, adjusted with unexpected consideration, often bringing her specimens from outdoors to examine together inside. "Look, Mrs. Reynolds," Joe exclaimed one afternoon, carefully carrying a mason jar into the schoolroom. "We found a praying mantis. Jake wanted to pull its legs off, but I said you'd want to see it whole." "How very thoughtful of you," Nora replied, hiding her amusement as Jake rolled his eyes behind his brother's back. "Let's examine it together, shall we? Then we can release it where you found it." These small moments, the boys' growing curiosity about the world, their gradually improving behavior, their occasional thoughtfulness brought Nora a deep satisfaction that helped distract from her increasing physical discomfort and anxiety about the approaching birth. Xavier, too, seemed to be watching her condition with growing concern. He had begun checking on her more frequently, sometimes bringing her a cup of tea in the evenings, or suggesting the boys spend their afternoon with Virgil learning about horses so she could rest. "Mrs. Hollister says we should send for the doctor from Wasco," he said one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the spectacular sunset paint the prairie sky in shades of orange and purple. The boys were already in bed, exhausted from a day spent helping with the apple harvest from the small orchard behind the house. "There's no need yet," Nora assured him. "My time is still several weeks away." "Babies don't always keep to schedules," Xavier pointed out. "And it's a long ride to town." "Mrs. Hollister mentioned she's attended many births," Nora said, though the thought of the stern housekeeper in that role wasn't entirely comforting. "Still," Xavier persisted, "I'd feel better knowing Doc Warren was aware of the situation." Nora hesitated. She hadn't been back to Wasco since the day Xavier had found her at the train station, and the thought of facing the town's doctor and whatever gossip might follow made her uneasy. Sensing her reluctance, Xavier added gently, "He won't come to the ranch unless needed. But he should know to be prepared, just in case." Nora nodded, acknowledging the wisdom in his concern. "You're right, of course. Thank you for thinking of it." They sat in companionable silence as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared. These quiet moments together had become increasingly common over the past weeks, a chance to discuss the twins' progress, ranch matters, or sometimes just to enjoy the peaceful end of the day together. "I've been meaning to ask," Xavier said after a while. "What will you do after the baby comes?" "Once you've recovered, I mean." The question caught Nora off guard, though she had asked herself the same thing many times. "Continue teaching the boys if you're still satisfied with my work, unless—" A sudden fear gripped her. "Are you suggesting the arrangement should end?" "No," Xavier said quickly. "Not at all. The boys are thriving with you. He seemed uncharacteristically uncertain. "I wanted to be sure you weren't planning to leave once you're able." Relief washed through her. "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted. "And truthfully, I wouldn't want to leave even if I did. The boys have become dear to me." Xavier's expression softened in the dim light from the parlor windows behind them. "They feel the same. Jake asked me yesterday if your baby would be their cousin." Nora's hand went to her heart. "What did you tell him?" "I said that family isn't always about blood." He turned to look directly at her. "This ranch has felt more like a home since you arrived, Nora. I'd like you to stay, not just for the boys, but because—" He trailed off, seeming to reconsider his words. "Because—" she prompted, her pulse quickening. Before he could answer, Mrs. Hollister appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Blackburn, there's a problem at the North Corral. Virgil says you're needed right away." Xavier stood, his expression shifting back to its usual reserve. "We'll continue this conversation later," he said to Nora, then followed Mrs. Hollister into the house. Left alone in the gathering darkness, Nora wondered what he had been about to say. The possibility that he might harbor feelings for her beyond their professional arrangement seemed both thrilling and terrifying. She was still legally unmarried, still carrying another man's child, still dependent on his employment. Yet she couldn't deny the growing warmth she felt in his presence, or the way her spirits lifted when he entered a room. It was different from what she had felt with Harrison, less desperate, less consuming, but somehow deeper, like roots taking hold in fertile soil rather than a wildfire burning through dry grass. "Be sensible," she whispered to herself, rising with some difficulty from her chair. "Even if he does care for you, what kind of future could there be?" But as she made her way inside, she couldn't help but remember his words. Family isn't always about blood. Perhaps there was wisdom there that applied to more than just the twins and her coming child. The first snow of the season arrived in mid-November, dusting the prairie with white and transforming the landscape overnight. Nora woke to the twins' excited shouts as they discovered the changed world outside their windows. "Snow, Mrs. Reynolds. Can we go sledding? Please." "Uncle Xav said we could if you said it was all right." Jake's face pressed against her sitting room door before she had fully dressed, his words tumbling out in breathless excitement. "After your lessons," she called through the door, smiling at his groan of disappointment. "And only if you both concentrate exceptionally well this morning." It was a powerful incentive. The boys applied themselves to their reading and arithmetic with unprecedented focus, and Nora rewarded them by ending lessons an hour early. Xavier had already prepared an old wooden sled, and he was waiting patiently by the small hill behind the orchard when they emerged from the house bundled in coats, scarves, and mittens. "You should stay on the porch," he told Nora, concern evident in his expression as he eyed her heavily pregnant form. "The path might be slippery." "I'll be careful," she promised. "I wouldn't miss their first snow day of the season." He looked as though he might argue, but instead offered his arm for support as they walked slowly toward the hill. The boys raced ahead, dragging the sled behind them, their breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. "You've brought real joy back into their lives," Xavier said quietly as they watched the twins scramble up the hill. "After Catherine died, I wasn't sure they'd ever be carefree again." "Children are remarkably resilient," Nora replied, and you've provided them stability and love. That matters more than anything." They reached a bench Xavier had positioned at the bottom of the hill, and he helped Nora settle onto it before joining the boys at the top. Nora watched as he positioned them on the sled, gave instructions, and then sent them down the gentle slope with a push. Their shrieks of delight carried clearly in the winter air. For the next hour, Xavier alternated between sledding with the boys and checking on Nora. She insisted she was comfortable despite the cold, wrapped in the thick wool blanket he had brought for her. In truth, she was enjoying the scene too much to consider returning indoors. Xavier laughing with his nephews, his usual reserve melting away as he engaged in their play. After a particularly spectacular tumble that left all three of them covered in snow, Xavier called an end to the sledding. The boys protested until he promised hot chocolate and a story by the fire if they came in without complaint. As they trudged back toward the house, the first twinge caught Nora by surprise. She gasped softly, placing a hand on her abdomen. Xavier was immediately at her side. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she assured him, forcing a smile. "Just the cold, I think." He looked unconvinced but said nothing more as they continued toward the house. Mrs. Hollister took charge of the boys, herding them toward the kitchen with promises of warming drinks, while Xavier insisted on escorting Nora to her room. "You should rest," he said as they reached her door. "You're too pale." Another pain gripped her, stronger this time, and Nora couldn't hide her wince. Xavier's eyes widened in alarm. "The baby." "It's too early," she protested, though uncertainty crept into her voice. "Dr. Warren said December." "Babies make their own schedules," Xavier reminded her, echoing his words from weeks before. "I'm sending Virgil for the doctor." Before Nora could argue further, another contraction seized her, strong enough that she had to lean against the doorframe for support. Xavier's expression shifted from concern to decision. "It's starting," he said firmly. "Let's get you settled. I'll have Mrs. Hollister come up right away." The next hours passed in a blur of increasing pain and activity around her. Mrs. Hollister, for all her previous stiffness toward Nora, proved surprisingly competent and comforting as labor progressed. She directed the household with calm efficiency, ordering hot water brought up, linens prepared, and the twins kept occupied downstairs. Xavier sent Virgil galloping toward town for the doctor. But as the afternoon wore on and Nora's labor intensified, it became clear the baby would arrive before help could return. First babies often take their time, but this one's in a hurry, Mrs. Hollister informed Xavier when he inquired about Nora's progress. "Doctor won't make it back before dark, and this child won't wait for morning." Xavier paced the hallway outside Nora's room, flinching at each cry of pain that escaped through the closed door. The boys had been fed and put to bed, confused and somewhat frightened by the unusual activity and their uncle's obvious distress. "Uncle Xav," Joe had asked as Xavier tucked them in. "Is Mrs. Reynolds going to die like Mama did?" The innocent question had struck Xavier like a physical blow. "No," he'd answered with more certainty than he felt. "Mrs. Reynolds is strong, and Mrs. Hollister knows what to do. Everything will be fine." Now, as night fell and the snowfall intensified outside, Xavier found himself doing something he hadn't done in years: praying. Not the formal prayers of Sunday services, but desperate pleas bargaining for Nora's safety and that of her child. When a particularly agonized cry was followed by silence, Xavier froze, his heart seeming to stop in his chest. Then came the unmistakable wail of a newborn, high and indignant at being thrust into the cold world. Mrs. Hollister appeared in the doorway moments later, her severe face transformed by a satisfied smile. "A boy," she announced, "small but strong, Healthy lungs on him, that's certain. And Nora? Xavier demanded, exhausted but well. She did beautifully. Mrs. Hollister gave him an appraising look. You can see them shortly, once I've finished getting them settled. It was another agonizing half-hour before Mrs. Hollister finally permitted him to enter the room. Nora lay propped against pillows, her face pale but radiant, cradling a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up as Xavier approached, and the emotion in her eyes made his breath catch. "Would you like to meet him?" she asked softly. Xavier moved closer, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny red face partially visible among the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was sleeping peacefully now, his miniature features relaxed in slumber. "He's perfect," Xavier said, his voice rough with emotion. "Would you like to hold him?" The request startled him. "I haven't held a baby since the twins were born." "You won't drop him," Nora assured him with a tired smile. "Here." Before he could protest further, she was carefully transferring the small bundle into his arms. Xavier adjusted his hold awkwardly, terrified of crushing the fragile new life he now cradled. The baby stirred slightly, tiny eyelids fluttering, then settled again. A sensation Xavier couldn't name flooded through him, protectiveness, tenderness, and something deeper that tightened his chest and burned behind his eyes. "What will you call him?" he asked, not looking up from the infant's face. "Samuel," Nora replied. "After my grandfather." Samuel Thomas Reynolds. A good, strong name. Xavier finally lifted his gaze to meet hers. "He's lucky to have you as his mother, Nora." "We're both lucky," she said softly. "If you hadn't been at the station that day." She didn't finish the thought. "I almost wasn't," Xavier admitted. "I had no real reason to be in town that afternoon. Something just told me to go." He carefully handed Samuel back to Nora, his fingers brushing against hers in the exchange. "Now I know why." Their eyes held for a long moment, communicating something neither was ready to voice aloud. Finally, Mrs. Hollister's return broke the silence. "That's enough excitement," she announced firmly. "Mrs. Reynolds needs rest, Mr. Blackburn. You can continue your conversation tomorrow." Xavier nodded, reluctantly backing toward the door. "If you need anything at all, we'll be fine," Nora assured him. "Good night, Xavier, and thank you." As he closed the door behind him, Xavier knew with sudden certainty that the feelings he'd been fighting for weeks had taken permanent root in his heart. Nora and her son weren't just employees or temporary residents of his home, they had become essential to it, and to him. The question that remained was whether Nora could ever see him as more than her employer, her rescuer, the man who had offered sanctuary when she most needed it. And whether a woman like Nora, educated, refined, deserving of the best life had to offer, could ever be truly happy with a rough cattleman, whose world was limited to the Kansas prairie. Dr. Warren arrived the following morning, having been delayed by the worsening snowfall. After examining both mother and child, he pronounced them healthy, though he advised Nora to rest completely for at least a week. "The boy is small but robust," he informed Xavier afterward. "Mrs. Reynolds is recovering well, but childbirth is a serious ordeal. She'll need time to regain her strength." "She'll have it," Xavier assured him. "We can manage the boy's lessons for a while." The doctor hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "I must say, Blackburn, this is a most unusual arrangement." "There's talk in town." "I don't give a damn about talk," Xavier interrupted, his tone hardening. "Mrs. Reynolds is employed here as the twins' teacher. Her personal circumstances are no one's business but her own." Dr. Warren raised his hands placatingly. "No offense meant. Just thought you should be aware." He paused, then added with a hint of approval, "Not many would have done what you did, taking her in. It speaks well of you." After the doctor left, Xavier found himself facing an unexpected challenge explaining Samuel's arrival to the twins. Mrs. Hollister had kept them occupied during the birth and immediate aftermath, but by morning they were bursting with curiosity. "Can we see the baby?" Jake asked at breakfast, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Is it a boy or a girl?" Joe added. "Does it cry all the time?" "Tommy Wilson's baby sister cries all day and all night." Xavier considered how to respond. "The baby is a boy. His name is Samuel. And yes, you can see him, but only for a few minutes. Mrs. Reynolds is very tired and needs to rest." "Is she sick?" Jake asked, his face clouding with worry. "Like Mama was." "No," Xavier said firmly, understanding the source of their anxiety. "Having a baby is hard work, but Mrs. Reynolds is just fine. She's resting to regain her strength." This seemed to reassure them, and after breakfast, Xavier took them upstairs for a brief visit. Nora was sitting up in bed, Samuel sleeping in a makeshift cradle nearby. She smiled warmly as the boys entered, their usual boisterousness tempered by awe at the situation. "Come meet Samuel," she invited, gesturing them closer. The twins approached cautiously, peering into the cradle with identical expressions of fascination and slight disappointment. "He's so small," Joe whispered. "And wrinkly," Jake added with brutal honesty. Nora laughed softly. "All babies start that way. He'll grow quickly, you'll see." "Will he play with us?" Joe asked hopefully. "Not for a while," Nora explained. "But eventually, yes, and you can help me take care of him when he's a bit older." This prospect seemed to please them. After a few more minutes of whispered questions and careful observations of the sleeping infant, Xavier ushered them out to let Nora rest. He was surprised by how naturally she had included the boys, making them feel part of this new development rather than displaced by it. Over the next few days, a new routine gradually established itself in the household. Mrs. Hollister, revealing an unexpected maternal side, took charge of showing Nora how to care for the newborn. The boys, initially disappointed that their lessons were temporarily suspended, found themselves assigned special duties by Xavier bringing fresh water to Nora's room, fetching clean blankets, or reading aloud to her when Samuel was sleeping. Xavier himself felt strangely unsettled. He continued his ranch duties during the day, but his thoughts constantly returned to the mother and child upstairs. He checked on them frequently, often bringing small tokens, a book from the library, wildflower honey from the pantry, a tiny carved wooden horse he'd made years ago for the twins. Nora seemed genuinely touched by these gestures, but Xavier sensed a new reserve in her manner toward him. She was unfailingly grateful and polite, but something of the easy companionship they had developed over the autumn months seemed to have shifted. On the 5th day after Samuel's birth, Xavier found Nora sitting in the rocking chair by her window, the baby sleeping against her shoulder. The late November sunlight caught in her hair, bringing out auburn highlights he'd never noticed before. She looked tired but peaceful, humming softly to her son. "How are you feeling today?" Xavier asked, remaining in the doorway. "Better," she replied, gesturing for him to enter. "Stronger. I think I might try coming downstairs tomorrow just for a short while." "There's no rush," he said, taking the chair opposite her. "The boys are managing surprisingly well with the arrangement." "They've been wonderful," Nora agreed. "I never expected them to be so helpful. Children often rise to expectations when given the chance." Xavier watched as she gently adjusted Samuel's position. "He's thriving." "Yes." Her expression softened as she gazed down at her son. "I was so afraid, not just of the birth but of what would come after, how I would manage alone." "You're not alone," Xavier said quietly. Nora lifted her eyes to his face. No, thanks to you, but I can't help wondering what happens next, this arrangement. She hesitated. It was meant to be employment, yet you and Mrs. Hollister have been caring for me as if I were family. The lines have blurred. Xavier leaned forward slightly. Would it be so terrible if they remained that way? What do you mean? Nora's voice was barely above a whisper. I mean that having you and Samuel here, it feels right, Nora. The house was just a building before you came. Now it's becoming a home again. He drew a deep breath. I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures, but I know what I feel. Nora looked down at Samuel, then back at Xavier, conflict clear in her expression. I'm still recovering from one man's broken promises, she said softly, and I have Samuel to consider now. I can't afford to make another mistake. I understand. Xavier nodded, keeping his disappointment from his voice. I'm not asking for an answer today, just asking you to consider the possibility of something more than an employer-employee relationship between us. And what would that be exactly? Nora asked, a hint of challenge in her tone. Xavier met her gaze steadily. Marriage, eventually, if you'll have me. The directness of his answer seemed to startle her. She remained silent for so long that Xavier began to regret his frankness. You hardly know me, she finally said. I know enough, he replied simply. I know you're kind and patient with the boys, even when they try your limits. I know you're brave, leaving everything familiar to forge your own path. I know you face difficulties with grace and never seek pity. He paused, then added quietly, I know I've never met another woman who makes me feel the way you do. Nora's cheeks flushed slightly. I need time, she said, neither accepting nor rejecting his implied proposal. Take all the time you need, Xavier assured her, rising from his chair. I'm not going anywhere. Remember what I said that first day? A small smile touched her lips. You said you wouldn't leave. I meant it then, and I mean it now. He moved toward the door, then turned back. Just one thing to consider, Nora. The heart knows what it wants, even when the head is still catching up. With that, he left her to her thoughts, hoping he hadn't pushed too far too soon. But as he descended the stairs, Xavier felt oddly at peace. He had spoken his truth, and now all he could do was wait for Nora to discover hers. Winter settled fully over the Kansas prairie in the weeks that followed, bringing shorter days, longer nights, and occasional fierce blizzards that left the ranch isolated for days at a time. Inside the main house, a different kind of transformation was taking place. Nora gradually resumed her duties with the twins, though in a modified form that accommodated Samuel's needs. The schoolroom became a warmer, more inviting place, with a cradle in the corner where Samuel napped during lessons. The boys, to everyone's surprise, became fiercely protective of the baby, arguing over whose turn it was to help rock him to sleep or watch over him while Nora prepared their lessons. Xavier kept his word, neither pressing Nora for an answer to his proposal nor withdrawing his attention. He continued to assist with the twins' education when needed, joined them for meals, and spent evenings in the library while Nora read to the boys. But he was careful to give her the space she had requested, never referring directly to their conversation about a possible future together. Christmas approached, bringing excitement to the household. The twins had endless questions about Santa Claus, presents, and holiday traditions. Nora, now fully recovered from childbirth, threw herself into creating a festive atmosphere. She enlisted the boys' help in decorating the house with pine boughs, berries, and paper snowflakes they crafted during art lessons. We never had proper Christmas decorations before, Joe confided as he helped Nora hang strings of popcorn on the small pine tree Xavier had brought in from the property. Uncle Xav always gave us presents, but Mama was too sick last year, and before that. He trailed off, suddenly remembering his mother with a child's mixture of grief and confusion. "What did you do for Christmas when your mother was well?" Nora asked gently, sensing an opportunity for the boy to process his feelings. Joe's face brightened at the memory. "She made gingerbread and sang songs. Papa would play the fiddle and we'd all dance around the parlor." His smile faded slightly. "Uncle Xav doesn't play music or dance." "Perhaps we could change that this year," Nora suggested. "Would you like to learn some Christmas carols to perform on Christmas Eve?" The idea took hold with both twins, who threw themselves into practicing with unexpected dedication. Xavier, overhearing their rehearsals one afternoon, smiled to himself. It had been years since music had filled the house. 3 days before Christmas, Virgil returned from a supply run to Wasco with the mail and several packages Xavier had ordered weeks earlier. That evening, after the boys were in bed, Xavier found Nora in the library, writing in the journal she had begun keeping shortly after Samuel's birth. "May I interrupt?" he asked from the doorway. She looked up with a smile that made his heart beat faster. "Of course. I was just recording Samuel's latest achievement. He tracked my movement across the room today with his eyes. Mrs. Hollister says it's a sign of good intelligence." Xavier chuckled. Mrs. Hollister seems to have become quite the expert on babies, for someone who claimed to have little patience for infants. "She's certainly changed her tune," Nora agreed. "This morning I found her singing to him while she thought no one was listening." Xavier took a seat across from her, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I have something for you. An early Christmas gift." Nora looked surprised. "You didn't need to, I wanted to," he interrupted gently, extending the package toward her. "It's nothing elaborate." She accepted it with a questioning glance, then carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a small, leather-bound book. Opening it, she gasped softly. "Poetry," she whispered, turning the pages reverently. "Wordsworth. You mentioned once that you'd left your books behind when you came west," Xavier explained. "I remembered you said he was your favorite." Nora ran her fingers over the gilded edges of the pages. "This is beautiful, Xavier. Thank you." She looked up at him with shining eyes. "How did you even find this in Kansas?" "I have my resources," he said with a hint of mystery, not admitting that he'd written to a bookseller in St. Louis specifically to locate the volume. "There's an inscription." Nora turned to the front page, where Xavier had written in his strong, precise handwriting, "To Nora, may you find as much joy in these pages as you have brought to this home. With deepest affection." Xavier, she traced the words with her fingertip, then met his gaze. "This means a great deal to me." "I'm glad." He hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about what you said about needing time. I want you to know that hasn't changed. There's no pressure, Nora. I just wanted you to have something that would bring you pleasure." "You've already given me and Samuel so much," she said softly. "A home, security, purpose. Those things were already within you," Xavier countered. "All I did was provide the setting." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Xavier rose to leave. "It's getting late. I should let you get some rest." As he reached the door, Nora's voice stopped him. "Xavier," he turned. "Yes, the time you've given me, it's helped. I've been thinking a great deal about possibilities." Xavier felt hope stir within him but kept his expression neutral. "Good, that's good. Good night, Xavier." "Good night, Nora." He closed the door softly behind him, allowing himself a small smile as he walked down the hallway. It wasn't an answer, not yet, but it felt like a beginning. Christmas Eve arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. The house was warm and fragrant with the scent of pine boughs, and the cinnamon-spiced cider Mrs. Hollister had been mulling all afternoon. The twins were nearly bursting with excitement about their planned carol performance and the prospect of presents the following morning. After a special supper, they gathered in the parlor around the decorated tree. Even Mrs. Hollister and Virgil joined the family circle, accepting cups of cider and settling in for the boys' musical presentation. Jake and Joe stood before the fireplace, nervously straightening their best shirts before launching into their carefully rehearsed carols. Their young voices, sweet and occasionally off-key, filled the room with Silent Night and God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. Nora accompanied them on the old piano that had stood unused in the corner since Catherine's death, her fingers finding the keys with practiced ease. Xavier watched from his armchair, Samuel sleeping contentedly in his arms. The baby had become accustomed to his hold over the past weeks, often settling more quickly for Xavier than for anyone, except Nora herself, a fact that secretly delighted him. When the boys finished their performance to enthusiastic applause, Xavier surprised everyone by standing carefully, passing Samuel to Mrs. Hollister and retrieving a fiddle case from behind the sofa. "Uncle Xav," Jake exclaimed, "you have a fiddle." "It was your father's," Xavier explained, opening the case to reveal the well-preserved instrument. "I thought tonight might be a good time to bring it out again." He positioned the fiddle under his chin, tested the strings, and then began to play a lively rendition of Jingle Bells. The twins' eyes widened in amazement, and even Nora looked stunned. "You never mentioned you could play," she said when he finished the song to delighted applause. Xavier gave a modest shrug. "It's been years, I'm rusty." "Play another," Joe begged. "Play the one Papa used to play for dancing." Xavier hesitated only briefly before launching into a spirited folk tune. Mrs. Hollister passed Samuel back to Nora, then shocked everyone by pulling Virgil to his feet. "Don't just sit there gawking," she told him. "A proper reel needs dancers." The normally taciturn ranch hand looked mortified but complied, awkwardly following Mrs. Hollister's lead as she demonstrated the steps. Soon the boys joined in, skipping and twirling with more enthusiasm than skill. Nora sat with Samuel, laughing at their antics until Xavier finished the song and crossed to where she sat. Without a word, he took the baby from her arms and placed him carefully in his cradle. "Your turn," he said, extending his hand to Nora. "Oh, I couldn't," she began. "Just one dance," he insisted gently. "Mrs. Hollister can watch Samuel for a moment." Nora hesitated, then placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her to the center of the room. Xavier nodded to Virgil, who had picked up the fiddle and was tuning it experimentally. "You know the Mountain Maid?" Xavier asked, and Virgil nodded, beginning to play a slower, sweeter melody than before. Xavier drew Nora into a simple waltz, his hand respectfully at her waist, maintaining a proper distance between them. They moved together around the small space, the twins watching in fascination from the sidelines. "I never would have guessed you could dance," Nora said, a hint of teasing in her voice. "My mother insisted all her sons learn," Xavier admitted. "Said no woman would have us otherwise." "Wise woman." "She would have liked you," Xavier said quietly, his eyes holding hers. Strong-minded but kind-hearted, Nora's cheeks flushed slightly. "I wish I could have met her." "So do I." The music ended and they stopped dancing, though neither immediately stepped away. For a brief moment, it seemed to Nora that everyone else in the room had disappeared, leaving just the two of them in a small circle of firelight and music. The spell was broken by Samuel's cry as he woke, demanding attention. Nora reluctantly moved away from Xavier to tend to her son, but the warmth of his hand at her waist seemed to linger long after. Later that night, after the boys had finally been convinced to go to sleep with promises that Santa wouldn't come until they were dreaming, Nora found herself unable to settle. Samuel was sleeping peacefully for once, but her thoughts kept returning to the dance, to Xavier's steady gaze, to the feeling of rightness she had experienced in his arms. A soft knock at her sitting room door startled her. Opening it, she found Xavier standing there, still dressed though the house had gone quiet hours ago. "I saw the light under your door," he explained. "Thought you might still be awake." "Come in," she invited, suddenly conscious of her dressing gown, though it was perfectly modest with its high neck and long sleeves. Xavier entered but remained standing, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "I wanted to thank you," he said finally. "Tonight was special for the boys." "For all of us." "It was wonderful," Nora agreed. "I've never seen the boys so happy." Xavier nodded, looking around the room as if searching for words. His gaze fell on the poetry book he had given her, open on the small table by the window. "You've been reading it," he observed, "every night." Nora moved to the table and picked up the volume. "There's one poem that keeps drawing me back, about quiet growth and certainty." She found the page and handed him the book. Xavier read silently, his expression softening. "It reminded me of us," Nora said quietly. "Of how feelings can develop slowly, steadily, without drama or grand gestures. How they can take root and grow stronger with time." Xavier looked up from the book, a question in his eyes that he seemed afraid to voice. Nora took a deep breath. "You asked me to consider possibilities, Xavier." "I have, and I've realized something important." She moved closer to him. "What I felt for Harrison was infatuation, bright and hot and quickly extinguished when tested. What I feel for you." She placed her hand gently on his arm. "It's deeper, steadier. It's grown day by day through ordinary moments and extraordinary ones." Xavier set the book aside, his full attention now on her face. "Nora, I don't need more time," she said simply. "My answer is yes." For a moment he seemed unable to process her words. Then his face transformed with a joy so pure it took her breath away. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't want you to feel obligated because of our arrangement or because of what I've done for you and Samuel." "I'm certain," Nora assured him. "This isn't gratitude, Xavier. It's love." He reached for her then, drawing her gently into his arms. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I think I have since that first day at the train station, though I was too stubborn to admit it even to myself." Nora looked up at him, her heart too full for words. Xavier bent his head slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Nora rose on tiptoe to meet him, and their lips touched in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. When they finally parted, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this properly," he said, "to court you as you deserve." Nora laughed softly. "We've been living under the same roof for months. I'd say we're well past the conventional courtship stage." "Still," Xavier insisted, "some things should be done right. I want to speak to Reverend Davies after the new year, set a date for spring." He hesitated. "Unless you'd prefer to wait longer, spring sounds perfect," Nora said, her heart light with certainty. "It will give us time to prepare the boys, to make arrangements." "And Samuel?" Xavier asked, a new note of seriousness in his voice. "I want to be clear about this, Nora. When we marry, I want to adopt him legally as my son. He'll have my name, my protection, my inheritance, everything the twins have." Tears filled Nora's eyes at this declaration. "You would do that? Take another man's child as your own?" Xavier's expression was solemn. "Samuel stopped being another man's child to me the moment I first held him. He's your son, Nora, and soon, I hope, he'll be our son." Nora could only nod, too overcome to speak. Xavier brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Merry Christmas, Nora," he whispered. "Merry Christmas, Xavier," she replied, rising once more to meet his kiss, knowing that this night marked the true beginning of their life together, not as employer and employee, not as rescuer and rescued, but as equals joined by love and choice. As spring transformed the Kansas prairie from winter's brown palette to vibrant greens and wildflower bursts of color, the Blackburn Ranch underwent its own transformation. Preparations for the April wedding occupied much of the household's attention, with Mrs. Hollister overseeing renovations to the master suite, while Virgil and the ranch hands constructed additional rooms for the growing family. Xavier had formally proposed to Nora on New Year's Day, presenting her with a delicate gold ring that had belonged to his grandmother. The twins had been included in the moment, their initial confusion giving way to excitement when Xavier explained that Nora and Samuel would become permanent members of their family. "Does this mean Samuel will be our brother?" Jake had asked, his brow furrowed in concentration. "In every way that matters," Xavier confirmed. "Just as you two are my sons in every way that matters, though I didn't father you." This explanation seemed to satisfy the boys, who immediately began debating whether brother or cousin was the better title for Samuel. Wasco's reaction to the engagement was predictably mixed. Some, like Reverend Davies, offered genuine congratulations, while others barely concealed their judgment of the situation. Dr. Warren, who had continued to check on Samuel's progress through the winter months, surprised everyone by becoming one of their strongest supporters. "Unconventional as it may be," he told Xavier during a February visit, "I've rarely seen a match better suited. That boy is thriving, the twins are settled, and Mrs. Reynolds, soon to be Mrs. Blackburn, looks happier than I've ever seen her." As the wedding day approached, Nora found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. Just 1 year earlier, she had been teaching in Wasco's schoolhouse, beginning a courtship with Harrison Whitley that she had believed would lead to a respectable marriage. Now she was preparing to wed a man she had barely known last summer, with a 4-month-old son and twin almost nephews who had captured her heart completely. "Having second thoughts?" Xavier asked, finding her alone on the porch one evening, 2 weeks before the wedding. Samuel was sleeping inside, and the twins were helping Mrs. Hollister prepare their bath. "Not about marrying you," Nora assured him, making room for him on the swing. "Just marveling at life's unexpected paths." Xavier settled beside her, his arm comfortably around her shoulders. They had maintained proper decorum since their Christmas Eve engagement, but these quiet moments together had become precious rituals. "Any regrets?" he asked, studying her profile in the fading light. "None," she said truthfully. "Though I do wonder sometimes what my parents would think. I haven't heard from them since I wrote about Samuel's birth." Xavier's arm tightened around her. "Their loss," he said simply. "Some people are too caught up in appearances to recognize what truly matters." "And what truly matters, Mr. Blackburn?" Nora asked, turning to face him with a smile. "Family," he answered without hesitation. "Love, building something together that's stronger than either of us could create alone." Nora leaned against him, content in the simple truth of his words. "2 weeks seems like an eternity," she murmured. Xavier chuckled. "Mrs. Hollister would have my hide if I suggested moving the date. She's determined that everything be perfect for the first Blackburn wedding in a generation." "It already is perfect," Nora assured him. "We could marry tomorrow in our everyday clothes and I would be just as happy." "I would too," Xavier admitted. "But some traditions are worth honoring." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in vivid oranges and purples. Such moments had become the foundation of their relationship: quiet understanding, shared joy in simple beauty, the certainty of the other's presence. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, with just enough breeze to rustle the new leaves on the trees without disturbing the decorations. Mrs. Hollister and the twins had arranged in the ranch's front yard, rather than hold the ceremony in Wasco's church, where not all the congregation had been supportive. Xavier and Nora had chosen to marry at home, with only close friends in attendance. Reverend Davies arrived mid-morning, bringing with him a small group from town who had genuinely wished the couple well. Dr. Warren and his wife, the Martinez family, whose children Nora had defended, several ranchers who had long respected Xavier's fair dealings. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply meaningful. The twins stood proudly at Xavier's side, wearing new suits and solemn expressions that occasionally gave way to excited grins. Mrs. Hollister held Samuel, now alert enough to watch the proceedings with wide, curious eyes. Nora wore a gown of pale blue silk that Xavier had ordered from St. Louis, her hair adorned with wildflowers the boys had helped gather that morning. When Reverend Davies pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed Nora with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of even Mrs. Hollister. The celebration that followed was joyful and relaxed, a feast spread under the shade trees, music provided by local musicians, children playing on the newly green grass. As evening approached, the guests gradually departed, leaving the new family to their first night together. Mrs. Hollister had prepared the renovated master suite, now expanded to include a small adjoining room for Samuel. The twins, exhausted from the excitement of the day, fell asleep almost immediately after being tucked in. Nora stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching their peaceful faces. "They didn't even ask for a story," she whispered as Xavier joined her. "That must be a first." "They'll make up for it tomorrow," he assured her, slipping his arm around her waist, demanding twice as many to compensate. They checked on Samuel, sleeping soundly in his cradle, then made their way to their own room. Xavier had spared no expense in making it comfortable for Nora. New curtains at the windows, a larger bed with a handsome quilt, a dressing table with a silver brush set he'd presented to her that morning. "Happy?" he asked as she took in the room that would now be theirs. Nora turned to him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain all she felt. "More than I ever imagined possible," she said honestly. "A year ago I thought my life was over when Harrison left. Now I understand it was just beginning." Xavier drew her into his arms. "I used to think the ranch was enough," he confessed. "That raising cattle and looking after the twins was all I needed, but there was always something missing." He touched her cheek gently. "It was you, Nora, you and Samuel. Our family wasn't complete until you arrived." "I love you," she whispered, rising to meet his kiss. "Thank you for not letting me leave that day." "Best decision I ever made," Xavier murmured against her lips, "sitting down on that train platform and saying I wouldn't leave." As night settled over the prairie, bringing stars to the vast Kansas sky, Nora knew she had found her true home not in a place, but in the people who now surrounded her with love and acceptance. The unexpected journey that had begun in fear and uncertainty had led her exactly where she was meant to be. 5 years later, the Autumn Harvest Festival in Wasco had become a tradition the Blackburn family rarely missed. Xavier drove the wagon into town with Nora beside him, Samuel, now a sturdy 5-year-old, seated between them. In the back, 9-year-old Jake and Joe kept careful watch over their 3-year-old sister, Eliza Catherine Blackburn, born almost exactly 2 years after Xavier and Nora's wedding. "Remember," Nora cautioned the older boys, "keep hold of Eliza's hand at all times. No wandering off." "Yes, Ma," they chorused, having long ago adopted the title for Nora that felt natural to all of them. Samuel bounced excitedly on the seat. "Will there be apple cider and pie and horses to ride? All of those things," Xavier assured him, ruffling the boy's dark hair so like his own that strangers never questioned their relationship. The formal adoption papers had been filed when Samuel was 6 months old, making him legally a Blackburn, though he knew the story of his birth. Nora had been determined there would be no secrets that could hurt him later. The town of Wasco had changed over the years, growing with the railroad's expansion and the increasing settlement of the surrounding land. New buildings lined the main street, and the old train platform where Xavier had found Nora had been replaced with a proper station building. As they pulled up to the festival grounds, Nora couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in her own life. The Blackburn Ranch had prospered under Xavier's careful management, allowing them to build a new schoolhouse on the property that now served not only their own children, but those of neighboring ranches as well. Nora taught 3 days a week, balancing her love of education with her role as mother and ranch mistress. "Thinking deep thoughts?" Xavier asked, helping her down from the wagon. "Just grateful ones," she replied, squeezing his hand. "Look at them, Xavier, our family." The children had already scattered to explore the festival, the twins guiding Eliza toward the pony rides, while Samuel examined a display of farm equipment with the serious concentration he applied to everything that interested him. "Best thing I ever built," Xavier agreed, his arm around her waist. "Better than any barn or corral or fence line." They spent the day enjoying the festival's offering sack races for the children, pie judging, in which Mrs. Hollister's apple pie took first place for the 3rd consecutive year, music, and dancing. Xavier and Nora still made time for at least one dance together at every social gathering, a tradition that had begun that Christmas Eve before their wedding. As the afternoon waned, Nora found herself standing near the new train station, watching passengers disembark from the eastbound train. Xavier had taken the children to see the prize livestock, giving her a few moments of rare solitude. Mrs. Blackburn, the voice behind her, was unfamiliar. Nora turned to find an elderly gentleman in an expensive suit watching her with an uncertain expression. "Yes," she replied, wondering if he was a business associate of Xavier's. The man removed his hat. "You wouldn't recognize me," he said, his voice wavering slightly. "I'm Thomas Reynolds, your father." Nora felt the world tilt beneath her feet. It had been nearly 6 years since she had last communicated with her parents, and almost 8 since she had seen them in person. Her letters following Samuel's birth and her marriage had gone unanswered. "Father," she managed, her voice barely audible over the bustling sounds of the festival. "What are you doing in Wasco?" "Looking for you," he replied simply. "May we sit for a moment?" Nora nodded mutely, leading him to a bench not unlike the one where her journey with Xavier had begun. They sat in awkward silence before her father finally spoke again. "Your mother died last winter," he said abruptly. "Influenza." "I'm sorry," Nora said, surprised to find she meant it despite the years of estrangement. "I didn't know. How could you?" Her father acknowledged. "We cut you off completely." He stared at his hands, aged and spotted with years. "It was wrong. I was wrong." Nora said nothing, too stunned by this unexpected admission to formulate a response. "After your mother passed, I found your letters in her desk drawer," he continued. "All of them about your son's birth, your marriage, your new daughter." She had kept them, read them, though she never answered. He looked up at Nora, his eyes filled with regret. She was too proud to admit her mistake. "I'm hoping I'm not." "What mistake?" Nora asked quietly, choosing convention over love, appearances over family. He shook his head slowly. "I've spent my life focused on reputation, social standing, what others thought, and where has it left me? Alone, with no one to share my final years." Before Nora could respond, she heard Samuel's voice calling, "Ma, Ma." She turned to see him running toward her, his face alight with excitement. "Ma, Pa says we can stay for the fireworks if you agree." He skidded to a stop, suddenly noticing the stranger. "Hello, sir," he added politely, the manners Nora had instilled momentarily overriding his enthusiasm. Thomas Reynolds stared at the boy, recognition dawning in his eyes. "This is my son, Samuel," Nora confirmed, placing her hand protectively on the child's shoulder. "Samuel, this is my father, your grandfather." Samuel's eyes widened with curiosity. "I didn't know I had a grandfather." "Neither did I until recently," Thomas said, extending his hand to the boy. "It's an honor to meet you, Samuel." Samuel shook the offered hand solemnly. "Do you live far away? Is that why we never met before?" "Yes," Thomas answered, his voice thick with emotion. "Very far away. But I'm hoping to change that if your mother is willing." Nora saw Xavier approaching, Eliza in his arms and the twins flanking him like protective sentinels. His expression was guarded as he took in the scene before him. "Xavier," she called, standing to make the introduction. "This is my father, Thomas Reynolds. Father, this is my husband, Xavier Blackburn." The men assessed each other silently before Xavier shifted Eliza to his hip and extended his hand. "Mr. Reynolds," he said formally, "you've come a long way." "Too far and far too late," Thomas admitted, accepting the handshake. "But I'm hoping it's not too late to know my daughter and her family." Xavier looked to Nora, making it clear that the decision was hers alone. She felt the weight of years of hurt and disappointment, but also the lessons of forgiveness and second chances that her life with Xavier had taught her. "Would you join us for the fireworks, Father?" she asked finally. "And perhaps come to the ranch tomorrow. We have a spare room if you'd like to stay for a while." The relief and gratitude in her father's eyes told Nora she had made the right choice. As they walked together toward the festival grounds, Xavier fell into step beside her, taking her hand in his. "You're sure about this?" he asked softly, while the children walked ahead with their newly discovered grandfather already peppering him with questions. "Yes," Nora said, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. "Life is too short for holding on to old hurts. You taught me that." "I did." Xavier looked genuinely surprised. "When you found me on that platform, I was broken by betrayal and blinded by shame," Nora reminded him. "But you saw beyond that, offered me a fresh start when I least deserved it." "You always deserved it," Xavier corrected, drawing her closer to his side. "I just happened to be the man lucky enough to be there when you needed someone to say they wouldn't leave." As the first fireworks burst overhead, painting the twilight sky with brilliant colors, Nora looked at the family they had built together, the twins now showing Eliza how to wave sparklers safely. Samuel deep in conversation with his grandfather, Xavier steady and strong beside her. From the darkest moment of her life had come everything she had ever wanted but never dared to imagine. Not the life she had planned, but the one she was meant to live, richer, more challenging, and infinitely more fulfilling than anything she could have created on her own. "I love you," she whispered to Xavier as another burst of light illuminated his face. "And I love you," he replied, bending to kiss her amidst the oohs and ahs of the crowd around them. "Always have, always will." In that moment, beneath the prairie sky where their journey had begun, Nora knew with absolute certainty that the cowboy who had refused to leave her alone on that platform had given her the greatest gift of all, not just a home or a name or security, but the courage to believe in love again when all hope seemed lost. And that, she thought as she looked around at their beautiful, unexpected family, was worth every step of the journey that had brought them here.